Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. Jonathan Jay is one of the world's leading trainers of people who wanted to learn how to buy businesses. Buying scores of businesses himself in a business career spanning 30 plus years, he'll teach you practical methods that work regardless of sector and in any country. Although Jonathan Jay first sold a business in 1999 and first bought a business in 2006, it is only until 5 years ago that he has started to show other people how to do it. After buying a group of companies from a private equity fund for £1 and selling them 11 months later for over £1 million, more and more people asked him to explain to them how they could do it too. And so he did. And the one-off event became dealmakers.co.uk, one of the world's leading training companies for people who want to learn how to buy a small business without risk or cash. Jonathan, welcome to the Deal Quest podcast.
Well, very good to meet you, Corey. Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, I mean, I don't think we could have a guest that's more on point with what our audience is looking for, because the whole premise of this podcast is that, hey, there's this ability to, you have this organic growth and you should know how to get clients and customers organically. But there's also this other way to grow, deal-driven growth. One of those kind of deals is acquisitions. And, not as many companies and founders and entrepreneurs and executives and leaders bring their companies to do that. Only a percentage of them do. So teaching more and more people how to do it is great. But before we delve into all of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because my guess is somebody who has bought and sold businesses and somebody who teaches people how to buy businesses might have not have been it back then, but you tell me.
Well, I wanted a business, and it didn't really matter to me what the business was. I just loved this idea of a business. It just felt way more important than working for someone else. And I've never actually had a job. I've never worked for anyone else ever. So I've always done my own thing. And I think it did start from when I was about 12 years old. And I didn't quite know what it was going to be, but I knew that one day I was going to be that business owner. I used to watch a TV show that was very popular in the 1980s called Heart to Heart with Robert Wagner. Yeah. And the opening title scene was Jonathan and Jennifer Hart. And of course, I'm Jonathan, he was Jonathan. I felt the bond. And the introductory words were saying, Jonathan Hart, self-made millionaire. And I thought, that's me. That's got to be me one day.
Wow, that's a pretty young age to have those thoughts. Did you have any entrepreneurial examples in your family? I'm always fascinated by this question because I had a guest on recently. We were talking, and he came from generations of entrepreneurs, and me on the other hand, nobody in my family was entrepreneurs, and we ended up in the same place. So I'm always curious as to whether they were models.
Not really. My parents were dance teachers and had a dance school, so that was their own business. And, okay. And that was over a 20 plus year period. I wouldn't say necessarily that they saw it as an entrepreneurial endeavor. It was more doing what they loved and being paid for it, where you typically wouldn't work for someone else. You would have your own dance. Right.
So it was self-employed versus being an entrepreneur,
exactly.
So to speak.
It's a slightly different mindset. I never had the safety net of parents who could fund me if things went wrong. I had to always survive using my own wits, because there was never that rich friends, rich family that would catch me if I fell. Yeah. And that's tough. It toughens you up. But it means you've always got to work hard. There is never, you can't ever let up.
One other question looking back, what was your first deal of any type? There were a couple mentioned early in your career in the bio, but maybe it was one of those. Maybe it was something even earlier, especially with the mentality you had as a kid. What's your first deal that you can think of?
Well, I remember very clearly as a teenager hiring a theatre and putting on a variety show, like a music hall type show, and selling tickets. And it was as professional as it could possibly be. I mean, I hired professional entertainers for this show. I did that for charity, actually. So, but I suppose that counts as entrepreneurial. I dropped out of university, out of college when I was 19. I was studying French very badly, I hasten to add. And a 4-year course only lasted about 3 months. And I wanted to do my own thing. And to be fair, I wasn't particularly successful. Yeah, I worked hard, but I probably worked hard in the wrong direction. And I never had a mentor. I never had anyone who could say, look, Jonathan, put all that entrepreneurial energy into doing this. And I didn't have that. And I think knowing if I could go back in time and help my sort of 19-year-old self, I would have been a lot further along, a lot faster. And I absolutely see the value of mentorship and someone who's been there and done it helping you.
Yeah, which is, obviously, and we're going to get to what you're doing now, which is phenomenal. Listen, I mean, this is not the kind of stuff we learn in school for the most part. I mean, I guess you could argue that there's some MBA programs that teach some things about M&A and whatever, but not really what, it's sort of like when I went to law school and we did a year of corporations class, but never learned how to form a corporation. We talked about the business judgment rule and all these theoretical concepts, but never learn really how to do what lawyers do. So
and it is one of those subjects that where theory only takes you so far. And when you're buying a business, it's wholly practical. And even your lawyers and your CPAs would see it quite often from a theoretical perspective, where you're in the thick of it. And it's all very well and good that the contract says something, and that's what contracts always say. But if you can sit down with the vendor or the person selling you the business and come up with something that you both agree with, let's put that in the contract instead.
Right.
So it's a real life situation, and your very best learning curve is actually doing it. Better still if you can do it and someone holds your hand through the process, because a lot can go wrong. I mean, I'm not all sort of sunshine, rainbows and unicorns about buying a business and telling you that you can do it with your eyes closed. There's a lot that can go wrong, a lot that you need to know, a lot of bumps in the road to get a deal over the line. But it's worth it. That's the thing. It's really worth it. And it can be absolutely life-changing in terms of your business, but life-changing in terms of you as an individual. I've got clients who've gone from self-employed to owning multi-million-dollar businesses in the space of 6 months, and changing their life forever in terms of not having to worry about money anymore. And it's wonderful to see that. That's incredibly gratifying.
Yeah, and I want to there's so much I want to get into on that, right? Because you have that distinction between self-employed and then really becoming an entrepreneur, or a true business owner, where you have multiple businesses or you have businesses that are be successful without you. And then we also see, I don't know if you're seeing this, especially, with these disruptions, whether it's the COVID pandemic, whether it's the economic issues, whatever, what you find is a lot of corporate refugees, right? Executives who were successful at some level in the corporate world, but now they don't want to do that anymore. And they're in a position potentially to buy businesses, right? But even senior executive journey within a big corporation is very, very different than becoming an entrepreneur and business owner, right?
Absolutely. I can think of one client immediately who lives in Switzerland and comes over to London for our sort of get-togethers. And he does M&A for a large corporation, and his deals are in the hundreds of millions.
Yes.
His first deal as an individual is going to be in the single-digit millions.
Right.
But you'd think that he knows everything about it, but he doesn't, because there is a big difference between having a whole team and leading a team to actually doing it yourself, rolling up your sleeves, sitting down with the owner, negotiating the deal, and getting the deal over the line. Big difference.
Love it. So I want to delve more into that and what you're doing now, but before we do that, I want to take you back to your own deals, because obviously as your bio has indicated, you've only gotten to the point. I mean, you talk about somebody holding somebody's hand. Well, in order to hold somebody's hand and really do a good job, ideally you have been there yourself, right? Especially because we just talked about the fact that the theory is the theory and the reality is the reality, right? So you've been through the reality. So let's talk a little bit. Your bio talks about some early deals of buying and selling. Let's talk about some of the deals you've done and the lessons you've learned from them. So give us some early examples of your own experience.
Yeah. So in the mid to late 90s, I started a magazine publishing company, and it was a business that I worked at very, very hard. I was in my 20s. I had the energy, the enthusiasm to work 7 days a week, wake up in the morning, work, go to bed. I was full on, but it didn't really make much money. And probably, quite frankly, it was never going to make very much money. And I labored at that for 2.5 years, worked so hard, but didn't really have very much to show for it until someone came along and wanted to buy the business. And it was a surprise. I mean, I wasn't looking for a buyer. They approached me. The deal was done pretty quickly, and we completed on a deal that gave me more money on that afternoon that we closed than I'd ever earned in the previous 2.5 years of running the business. And I thought, well, that was easy because it only took me 12 weeks to earn this money rather than the 2.5 years of struggling. So that was a really early eye opener to, you make money in M&A in 3 ways. First, when you buy the business. So if you structure the business correctly, maybe over financing the business has cash in the bank, you can pay yourself a deal fee on completion. And that's really attractive because that means you make money on day one. You make money when you go into ownership rather than having to wait for it. The second is obviously the profits of the business and dividends and distribution of the profit. And thirdly, when you sell the business. Yeah. And most people concentrate on number 2 and number 3. I encourage people, if the business has the right characteristics in terms of assets and cash, to make money when you go in, because it takes the pressure off to make money while you own it. There's always a bonus if you do. So that first business sale was a massive eye opener. And I then started a business in adult.
Let me ask you a question. Let me take it a step at a time. Sure. I'm sorry to interrupt, but so you weren't looking to sell. Somebody approached you. How did that buyer come to approach you? What was attractive? So you're running a business that's not that profitable, right? Not making you so much money, but yet it had some level of enterprise value. And I'm sure we're not talking about, that wasn't your retirement deal, I'm guessing, but you made very good money compared to what you were making.
Yes.
So definitely. What was the value in that business that your buyer saw that had them approach you?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was one particular title, one particular publication called the Achievement Report. And it was quite a highly priced, it was $200 a year newsletter. It's like a financial newsletter type thing, but it was all about personal development. We had Tony Robbins on the front cover one month. So that type of thing. And this was late 90s, as I said.
Yes.
And the buyer was a corporate training company. So they saw a strategic fit with our database of inquiries, because we had an inquiry database as well as a subscriber database. And they wanted to use the publication as their sort of in-house publication, where they could advertise their own products, their own courses and training courses. So the strategic fit and the value of the database, that was where it was at for them.
Let's take it a step back there, because for our audience, there's some important things in that, right? One is that, and we've talked about this before, the difference between a financial buyer and a strategic buyer, because for this kind of business, I'm sure there was not a single financial buyer who would have stepped in to buy it, right? It was only because there was that strategic opportunity. There was that one property that really made sense. And this is another key thing in deals. The buyer saw the opportunity to get more value out of that product, right? By being able to cross-sell or place their, whatever it is for their other products, right? So I think those are some really important points on, that can inform some folks and how a business that wasn't that profitable ended up having enterprise value to a particular buyer.
Exactly. I wouldn't say that you should bet on it. So if you've got a business that's making money, then you can always sell it to someone. It's a lot harder to sell a business that's not that profitable.
Yeah. Okay. So you were about to go on and talk about your next venture.
So that kind of launched me into the next business, which was accredited adult education. And we had a niche which was coaching and mentoring, which again in the late 90s was very, very new. Everyone thought of coaching as sports coaching.
Yes.
These days, you can't move for coaches. I mean, everyone's a coach. But back then, you had the soccer coaches, but you didn't have business coaches and life coaches. So we did training within corporations, particularly for their human resources departments, and we had individuals come on open programs as well. And it was a business that grew very quickly. We did well over $1 million of revenue in year one, and that was 20 years ago when $1 million actually meant something. I'm joking, of course, but you know what I mean. And it grew very, very rapidly. And we had a competitor. And the competitor was very irritating because the competitor was actually set up by a client of the business who'd gone and poached some of my key members of staff. It kind of halved my headcount because he offered them more money and better working conditions. And they set up in competition with me. And for 5 years, they were my main competitor. And they also grew to be a multi-million turnover revenue business. So this was an interesting situation because I got out of bed every morning thinking about them, and it actually spurred me on because we can't let those guys win. We've always got to beat them. And then one Sunday afternoon, I received a phone call from the owner, and he said, "Jonathan, I've got a proposition for you. Can we meet tomorrow?" So I met him the next day, and so that was a Monday afternoon. And by Friday afternoon, 4 days later, the same week, I owned that business. Wow. So when people say it takes a long time to do a deal, well, it can, but it doesn't have to. If you've got a motivated seller and a motivated buyer, and you've got a meeting of minds on value, and the lawyers realize that a deal needs to be done quickly, then you can get something over the line very quickly. And that was transformational to the business. It meant that all the friction of having an annoying competitor snapping at our heels was gone. Our advertising budget actually went down because we weren't competing with them on Google. This is obviously pre-Facebook and all of those platforms. It was just Google at the time. And I more than doubled the size of the business because we had this increased profitability and all of those things. And then a year later, I sold it to a private equity firm, and that was a retirement deal. That was a life-changing deal. I was 36 or 37 at the time. Probably didn't realize how fortunate I was, but that happened all very, 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 very quickly.
What was the motivation of the competitor to suddenly change from a competitor to a seller to you?
It was their personal circumstances. It was ill health.
Got it. Yeah. And, listen, that's an interesting point also for people looking to buy businesses. I mean, one of the things that makes the business world makes for opportunities, especially not at the huge levels. If we're talking about small and mid-sized businesses, it's what I often refer to as an inefficient market, right? There are reasons why health is certainly one that comes up a lot, why sellers get motivated. And I'm not pushing anybody to improperly take advantage of certain circumstances, but there are circumstances where there's motivated sellers and they're happy to get whatever the deal is, right? And it creates synergies where 1 + 1 is going to equal 3, 4, 5, or 6. So,
and he was really happy with the deal, and and I was happy with the deal. So everyone was happy. There wasn't any sense of anyone taking advantage of anyone, unless of course he was taking advantage of me and I didn't realize it.
Yeah, but I mean, like there are these circumstances that come up that create opportunities, and you were smart enough to jump on it, make a decision, and then move on it quickly and have your professionals do the same. So that's amazing. So then you sell it to a private equity firm, as you said, a retirement deal. So at much higher multiples than I'm sure you paid for that. Talk about that experience a little bit as we work our way up to what you're doing now, because all of this informs, I'm sure, how you're teaching people. Because dealing with private equity firms, whether it's to sell to them or certainly, we've done, but many people on the show talk about taking capital, or being acquired, taking capital from VCs or being fully acquired by PEs. Talk about that deal a little bit and why were they interested in the company? And they're obviously, were they combining it with one of the other portfolio companies, or was this a financial acquisition that they saw opportunities?
No, this was the business was very cash generative, so it was producing a lot of cash. I think we were at about in pounds. So let me put this into dollars for ease. We're at about $1.7 million of EBITDA. And that was a very attractive proposition. This was 2007, where you could borrow just about anything you wanted.
Great timing.
Yeah, I know. A few months later, it wouldn't have been, but we were very lucky. Well, I was very lucky, and they just went and got the funding from the bank. I think they put in about $500,000 of their own cash. So, but the rest of it was leveraged off of those very strong cash flows. So they just saw it as a cash cow. They eventually sold it to the person who was running it about 5 years later, who still owns it now. And it's still. I'm very proud of that, because I started it in 99. We're at 2003, so it's been going for 24 years. I mean, a business that I started 24 years ago is still going strong. I'm really proud of that.
That's phenomenal. Because listen, let's face it, not every business, does not survive that long, but certainly through ownership changes, sometimes those, at least one of those doesn't go well, right? So, the fact that you were able to sell it and then the PE firm sold it to an operator, and that, that's great. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to coreykupfer.com/assessment. That's coreykupfer.com/assessment, and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show. All right, so let's keep going. Are there any other deals? Well, I definitely wanted to hear about this deal you talk about in the bio, and then I want to really delve into what you're doing now. So this one where you paid £1 and sold it 11 months later for over £1 million.
So I'd acquired a very old marketing business. It was a 30-year-old business. Actually, I'd been a client of that business many years earlier.
Okay.
And the opportunity came along to buy it. In fact, actually, the owner approached me. He knew of me via LinkedIn. He thought I might be interested, and we did a deal on that. And around about the same time, I found out about a private equity-owned digital marketing business. They bought it as a platform investment. They'd never done anything with it. They'd never bought anything else. It had languished in the portfolio for that particular fund. The fund was coming up to the end of its life. They were selling everything to return to the fund so they could put the money back out to the original investors and make their own profit. And this business was sitting in the corner. They'd put in really poor management. Interestingly, the management were paid huge amounts of money. In dollar amounts, $200,000 a year, and they were lousy. It was just so bad. And they said to me, would you be interested in buying this? And I said, look, if I'm going to be buying the company and taking over the liabilities, they had all sorts of strange tax structures, which I kind of half understood. But I was told were not particularly great tax structures. And I said, I'll buy it for $1. I'll take over all the problems. I'll buy it for $1. And we did the deal fairly quickly. Now, of course, I've got all the problems. But I knew where the business was going wrong. They had about 80 staff members. They had this expensive management team. They had a core product, which was SEO and Facebook advertising and AdWords, that was really, really profitable. And it had recurring revenue. And then they had all these other things like video production and social media that was losing money. So I very, very quickly stopped doing all the things that were losing money. I let go of about 70 staff. I made them redundant. Everyone got paid every penny that they were owed. Obviously, they weren't happy about it, but no one was out of pocket. And they all found jobs elsewhere. They were young people. They could find jobs elsewhere very quickly. And I ended up with a smaller business doing about 3 million, well, in dollars, 5 million of annual recurring revenue. I found a buyer very quickly, sold it to them. So it was a very quick turnaround. I wrapped it up with this older business that I'd bought and sold it on, because I had no desire to run that business, none whatsoever. I mean, it was just it just filled me with dread. I'm not a great business operator. I've got the ideas, I've got the energy, the enthusiasm. I can get a deal done. I can get people inspired and moving towards a common goal. But don't let me near the office. That would be the worst thing anyone could do.
Love it. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to corykupfer.com/assessment. That's corykupfer.com/assessment and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show. All right. So listen, so now you have all this experience and now you decide, and obviously from what we said in the bio, people will come to you saying, hey, you've done all these deals, like how did, and especially that one from, $1, and obviously you assume some liabilities, which is why you got it for $1. And then, being able to sell or £1 and being able to sell it for over £1 million. People are coming to you and say, hey, how do I do this? And obviously, also, you had a background in some educational businesses, so which is another factor that we've just learned. So, talk to me about the work you're doing now, and how it's set up. What and what kind of is it one-on-one? Is it online? Is it group? Is it
sure.
And then what are the principles underneath? How you're teaching people to do what you obviously have done successfully for many years.
Yeah, sure. So 80% of what I do, teaching people how to buy a business, how to do it successfully, how to do it by limiting your personal risk, how to do it using different sources of funding, structuring the deals correctly, doing the due diligence. 80% of that education is free. I give it away for nothing. You can get it via my podcast. You can get it via my YouTube channel in particular. I've written books that I give away free. And so anyone can access that. And since the start of the pandemic, we discovered very quickly that 50% of my audience were outside the UK. So I'm in a very small country where pre-pandemic, I was just doing, my clients were only in the UK. But then through the power of Zoom and the power of the internet, I've now spread my wings wider and now I'm global. I'm a global training company.
Love it.
And then 20% people pay for. There's no obligation. There's no sales pitch. There's no hard sell. I do a Zoom training. I call it my fast track training. I do it over 3 sessions. In the UK, it's in the mornings. If you're in the States, it's in the afternoons. And it's reasonably low cost. It's about $500. And it gives everyone a grounding in how to buy a business. So you can do that program. At the end of it, you've got everything you need to go out and buy a business. And people do. And people buy multi-million-dollar businesses as a result of that $500 training, the fast track training. And then some people say, Jonathan, I want to work with you and spend more time with you. So I have like a 12-month program. I call that a mastermind program, not very original, but it means that I can help people on a deeper level because it's over a longer period of time. And we do that mostly through Zoom because we have clients all around the world. But if you're in the UK, we have get-togethers in London as well. So that's really my training program. But it's not just about me imparting my knowledge. It's about my previous masterminders and the deals that they've done. They join in with the teaching, and I bring in the lawyers and the CPAs to do the things that I'm just not qualified to do. I know how it works, but I'm not a qualified lawyer, so I bring in the qualified lawyer to teach that. And sure, it's all about practical subjects because I have the experience to be able to do that. But I also think that I'm a decent teacher. I'm a good teacher. And someone gave me a definition of this the other day that I hadn't heard before. And the definition was a good teacher is someone who can take a complex subject and break it down into easy to understand bite-sized chunks. Yes. And I have never had a confused client. I've never had anyone say, Jonathan, you've explained it to me twice and I still don't understand it. Maybe they don't get it the first time, but by the second time they go, aha, the penny drops. Yeah. So it's partly experience and partly those sort of teaching skills.
And listen, there are very, very, very many people who are great at what they do, but they could not teach it to anybody else for anything. First of all, and I've talked about this concept on the show before. First of all, there are a lot of people out there who are what the phrase I got it from. I think I first heard it from Bob Proctor, who's one of my mentors. But unconscious competence. Right?
Oh, yes.
They're really good at what they do, but they have no idea how they do it. No idea. So if you have no idea how you do it, you're certainly not going to be able to teach it to anybody else. The best somebody can do is watch you do it and try to glean the lessons, for themselves. But then you have folks who maybe have a better understanding, but they're just not good at teaching. That's a totally separate skill. So the fact that you can bring that, and what's interesting is, and listen, don't get me wrong, I've learned from some great teachers who maybe don't have, they have something to impart, even if they don't have the practical experience. But that combination of having really done it and being a great teacher is something that you don't often find. So I'm sure in a lot of value.
I think that's the quadrant, isn't it? Consciously competent.
Yes.
I believe. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And during the pandemic, I bought 48 businesses.
48. Wow.
Yeah. And people say, what would you recommend? Jonathan, what have you learned about buying 48 businesses? And what I've learned is don't do it. The stress was unbelievable. I was having sometimes three closing meetings a week. It was well, you know what it's like. You're doing one at a time. It was absolutely insane, and I ended up in hospital as a result. I was, the stress started to affect me physically. I had stomach pains to the extent that I had to have a colonoscopy, which is not the most enjoyable procedure, I can assure you. But they couldn't find anything wrong, which I was slightly embarrassed about, because that meant that it was all in my head. And I always hoped that they would find an ulcer, because then I could say, oh, it's the ulcer that's causing me the pain. But actually, it was psychosomatic, and I saw a therapist, and I was very embarrassed to talk about it at the time. But now, I find that actually it helps people when I say that, I don't always get it right. I took on too much, grew too fast, huge pressures on cash flow. I was looking at businesses thinking, do I own this one, or is this one we're about to close on? I'm not. It was like just so much. It was absolutely crazy, and I ended up selling to my business partner, not in a financially successful deal, but basically allowing her to take over the business, because I just didn't want to be in it. I didn't enjoy it anymore. So I've had the successes, and I've also had the tough times. And I think people tell me that they like hearing about the tough times way more than they want to hear about the successes.
Yeah, and I think that's very common, because, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because in the entrepreneurial, in the deal world and all that kind of stuff, very often, even if we admit our challenging times of failures, it's only done as a setup for the hero's journey, right? For how we came through right. On the other side, right? I had this tough time when but now I'm back and bigger and better than ever, and I learned lessons from it. But they sort of skip over the real of it, So you saying that you ended up in hospital, is huge. So let me ask you this. Because one of the things I love talking about is mindset, right? Because we can talk about the practical stuff, how you do due diligence on a deal, how you identify a deal, how you value a deal, how you get a deal closed, all that kind of stuff, right? But mindset is such a big driver and determinant of our success. So here you're a guy. You already told us you did a retirement deal, so you don't need the money, right? It's during the pandemic, and you take this path of buying 40 whatever businesses and putting yourself in hospital. What do you think drove that?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. So I think I'm naturally ambitious.
Yeah.
I'm not as motivated by money as some people might think. They think, oh, you're just doing it for the money. I do it because I want to do it. And I have inside me, it's the way I describe it is like a fire. It's like some burning inside me. I've got to keep active. I've got to do stuff. And it was a group that, the pandemic acquisitions were part of a group that I'd started building pre-pandemic.
Yes.
And then my business partner and I had a choice when the pandemic started as to whether we took a step back and waited for it to be over, or we pushed forward. I was actually on the phone to her in this room when I said, let's push forward. And it was a little bit like there was so little resistance. So there weren't any other buyers in the market, because they were all my competitors were private equity owned. I was the only privately owned group. And also there were more sellers because of the economic pressure. So the way I describe it is like one of those TV game shows where they drop $1 million from a helicopter and people are running around the fields picking up the $20 bills and holding them. But as they're picking them up and holding them and holding onto them like this, there are $20 bills dropping out the other end.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing. We were buying these businesses like crazy, but because their management structure was really for a far smaller company, we were making acquisitions, but then losing the relationship with the ones that we bought 3 months ago. So it was too much too soon. We grew way too quickly. And that was a massive cause of stress.
So, along those lines, let's talk a little bit about more, not necessarily, maybe others that you've made, but certainly ones you've seen. What are some of the mistakes that people make besides doing too many too quickly in buying businesses?
Yeah, sure. So buying a business is relatively straightforward. I don't want to say it's easy, but it's straightforward. There's a process. The people that I see the most successful are the people who follow the process and don't go off the plan. There is a system to this, which is what I do in my groups. I have a what I call the complete business buying system, 21 steps. And the people who don't follow the system the people who make it up as they go along always seem to it takes longer, cost them more money. The second mistake that I see people make is that they spend their own money and they believe they need to have, I don't know whether this is a British expression or whether this translates, skin in the game.
Yeah, that's a US expression as well.
Okay, great. So they have skin in the game. Now, that's all very well, but I think your skin in the game should be the effort that you're putting into the deal and the skill that you bring to it rather than your hard-earned money, your family's money. So I believe that you should be buying a business definitely at first where you don't risk any of your own cash. You get the finance from other sources other than your own pocket. The third thing I think people do incorrectly is that they buy businesses that are way too small. So they actually buy themselves a job rather than a business. So I always say buy $1 million business even as your first one, because $1 million business is going to have better financials. It's going to have better management. It's not going to fall over the moment the owner leaves. It's going to make more profit, we hope, than a business that does, let's say a business does $200,000 a year and makes 20% net profit. Well, that's $40,000. $40,000 is a job,
right?
And you don't want to buy a job. A business,
and not a great one either.
Not a great one. Yeah, exactly. So a business that does $1 million a year, making 20% profit, that's $200,000. Now that's starting to move the needle. That's starting to pay off your mortgage. That's starting to buy the holiday home, So that's starting to make a difference. So 5 years of owning that, you can make a real difference. So I always say go bigger rather than smaller. People start small because of the mindset, Corey. It's the mindset of a comfort zone that, I used to earn $40,000. Therefore, that's the business that I should be looking at. And yeah. I get it. I absolutely understand it. And I would say that 50% of my time with clients is getting them to think bigger, getting the mindset right. And finally, I think the successful deal makers are the deal makers who have clarity and focus of where they're going, what they want to achieve, how they're going to achieve it, and then do it in kangaroo leaps, big kangaroo leaps, rather than little bunny hops. So instead of buying these little tiny businesses and putting all this effort in to buy little tiny businesses, put less effort in to buy bigger businesses.
And, all of those things that you say relate, right? Because yes, one of the reasons why a lot of folks may be looking at buying smaller businesses is because they have that mindset issue. I made, 40,000, so I'm going to buy a business that's that, and something that's much bigger than that is just beyond their scope. But yes. Part of it is also that, going back to your prior point, they may be thinking they have to do that with their own money, and that's what they can afford, right? So obviously the ability to get other, investment capital, loan capital, whatever it looks like, right, outside capital, really increases your ability to do bigger deals. So that those two things are related. And then and then that last point you made, flows from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So people always say, well, if I'm going to buy a business for $1 million, where do I get $1 million? I don't have $1 million. Well,
Right.
you don't have to have $1 million. In
That's
fact,
right.
actually, the deal makers that I see are the most successful are the ones who start off without the $1 million because they have to be more creative. The deal makers who've got a spare $1 million and write the check on day one, they're the ones who buy badly because they don't realize that they can be cleverer and more creative and keep their $1 million in the bank.
Yeah. And potentially, I mean, with the caveat of maybe you don't want to do 40 something of them, they could do more deals as well, right? With that capital, because they can leverage it, right? Or buy bigger businesses or a combination of both. So it's great. So, so it's interesting. So in your current model, you have a very classic, right? Current sort of educational business model, right? Give away a lot of content for free, which is different than in the old days, right? Where we were all, everything was proprietary and protected and, whatever, right? And then, have a more entry level product that brings people into the funnel. And then obviously you got a higher end offering for those folks who really want to delve in. And that's a model that, fascinates me because it really works. I mean, I've studied, I have many clients who use that model. We've looked at it, in terms of the leveraging the audience that we've gotten between the podcast and the book and everything else I do, to do some trainings around deals in general. And as this podcast is not, and we're talking about mainly M&A and buying businesses here, but the podcast, we talk about all types of deals, right? Strategic alliances, joint ventures, licensing, online affiliate deals, you name it as well. And I love, I love that model from both sides. I mean, because I think nowadays people expect, and the way they get to know you, it's not like from advertising, right? It's from consuming your content, having access to that without having any barrier to entry. And then they say, oh, wow, this guy, wow, he really knows his stuff. Not only does he have 21 steps that he's going to take us through, but he's lived them, right? And then, obviously they get to, get their toe wet. And then the people who it's also great from your point of view, not only from revenue, whatever, but people pre-qualify themselves, right? Because the people who come into your mastermind are by definition the ones who are serious, because they're the ones who've gone through that funnel and said, I want to make a bigger investment.
Yeah. And something, I've had people join mastermind without having any of that sort of pre-education.
Yep.
And I can see the difference. Because the people who've had the pre-education, if you like, they understand my methodology. They've started to develop the right mindset. Where people who just come in cold, they don't really necessarily sort of follow the steps. They've got their own idea of how it's meant to work. Where I've got a process that works. You've got to follow the process. If you make up your own process, there's no point being on the program.
Yeah, it really makes sense. All right. Before I ask you my final two questions, is there anything else that you want to say about, tips one way or the other, or what you offer or what you're seeing in the market generally? Any closing thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I think that this worldwide recession that we are in, whether it's labeled as a recession or not, definitely there's something going on. When there's economic uncertainty, a lot of business owners accelerate retirement plans. So they may be 62, 63, they're planning to retire at 65. And they say, you know what, we've been through a pandemic. We've now got a recession. It's been a struggle for a couple of years. Why do we need to continue like this? So there are lots of motivated sellers out there. So if you're thinking about buying a business, 2023 is an amazing year.
Yeah, I believe that as well. And listen, if you study history, and I've said this on this podcast before, there are so many deal opportunities in more challenging markets, and some of the biggest companies have grown out of. I mean, it's if you study history, they've grown out of challenging times.
Indeed. Yeah.
So absolutely great advice. All right, so Jonathan, before I ask you my final question, where can people find out more about your free content, your paid programs, everything else you have?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the best place is probably my YouTube channel. Over 170 videos. So if you type Jonathan J into YouTube and find a thumbnail that looks similar to me, you've got that channel. There's a free training course on there as well, a free video training course anyone can take, and you just click the links, take the course, and see if you like what I do.
Love it. Jonathan, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world, from all people, from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
That's a good question. Freedom to me is being able to have the options to choose where I go on holiday, choose where the vacations are, choose where I live, choose where I eat, and just having those choices. And I don't have a particularly expensive lifestyle. I'm not one of those gurus with Lamborghinis and yachts. So that's just not me, at all. But I have a daughter. She's nearly 7, my only child, and everything I do now is for her. So the freedom to spend time with her is the most important thing for me.
Love that. Love that. Jonathan J., thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thank you, Corey. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.coreykupfer.com/dealden. That's coreykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.